All right, well, hi, my name is Wendy Edson, and I am the Artistic Director of the San Luis Obispo International Film Festival. And it is my great honor to introduce our panel and our moderator for this discussion about the movie that you have hopefully just seen, Vinyl Nation. So I'd like to start with the man up on the screen right next to me, I think, unless our screens are different when you're looking at this, but anyway, Mr. Jim D. Jim moved to San Luis Obispo in 1965, and during junior high, high school, and as a journalism major at Cal Poly, Jim spent 90% of his time at Cal Poly's radio station, KCPR. As a college student, he started an on-again, off-again club called the Cinema Zoo. And after graduating, he opened the single-screen Rainbow Theater in 1979 in San Luis Obispo, and he owned it and managed it until it closed in 1989. Right around that time, he opened the Palm Theater, thankfully. And since then, it's become a slow icon. It's almost like a house of worship to all of us indie film lovers on the Central Coast. Its homey vibe, coupled with its incredibly inexpensive and delicious popcorn, and obviously the fabulous movies have made the Palm and its elusive owner, Jim D., legendary. Seldom seen, Jim is always working behind the scenes, programming some incredible independent film, and he finds a lot of them at international film festivals, and he also supports local filmmakers, students, and festivals like ours. He was one of the original founders of the Slow Film Fest and has been an ardent supporter since 1994. He still nurtures his longtime love of music and vinyl, and currently co-hosts a program on local public radio called Global Spin. He looks forward to being able to reopen the Palm Theater when it's safe to do so. So thanks so much for joining us, Jim. And I'll turn it over to you in just a sec. But first, I'm going to introduce everybody else. Starting with Christopher Boone, co-director of Vinyl Nation. Hi, Chris. He's a screenwriter and a filmmaker based in Albuquerque. Vinyl Nation is his first feature documentary. He previously directed a narrative feature called Sense, from his Nickel Fellowship semifinalist script. He's a contributing writer to No Film School and a frequent panel moderator for the Austin Film Festival and its On Story series. Welcome, Chris. Kevin Smokler, there he is. He's the co-director of Vinyl Nation and is the author of 3 books about pop culture, including Brat Pack America, a love letter to the 80s teen movies, and Practical Classics, 50 Reasons to Reread 50 Books You Haven't Touched Since High School. I love that title. He's appeared on stage in conversation with comedians, writers, actors, filmmakers, artists, and architects, and he lives in San Francisco, and Vinyl Nation is his first film. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Malik Thorne, right there in the center on my screen anyway, is the owner of a Satellite of Love in San Luis Obispo. Similar to Jim D., Malik is a former college and public radio DJ. He worked and helped manage Boo Boo Records for about 20 years. And almost 3 years ago, he started his own retail space called the Satellite of Love, although you'll still find him working at Boo Boo Records in the mornings. His main job until COVID-19 changed things was DJing weddings and events, and I hear he's really good at it. In fact, I tried to hire him and he was too busy. Anyway, he's been doing that for about 15 years. As a side note, I met Malik years ago when I was filming a short documentary called Real Men Knit, and I can attest to the fact that he's multi-talented and is a fabulous knitter. So welcome, Malik. Glad you could join us. Kristy Duncan, just next to Malik, was a college radio DJ and news director at KCPR, 1989 to 1991. She studied broadcast journalism at Cal Poly and worked at KJDJ, a news talk radio station in San Luis Obispo, before graduating. She's currently a group product manager at Adobe. She's been a vinyl record fan since the age of 2 when she got her first Beatles album. She was so inspired when she saw Vinyl Nation earlier this year that she restored and rebuilt a turntable and a custom platform so she could rediscover her record collection. Pretty cool. Thank you. And thanks for joining us, Kristy.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Manuel Barba, the owner of Traffic Records in Atascadero. A native of East Los Angeles, Manuel was inspired by record collections of his older siblings, parents, and extended family. And by the time he left home, he had a carefully curated record collection that reflected the eclectic urban landscape he'd grown up in. In the early 2000s, Manuel moved to San Luis Obispo and began a career as a social worker and therapist, serving Latino youth and families of San Luis Obispo County. He also moonlighted at Boo Boo Records. And in his spare time, he hosted weekly radio shows on public radio and organized jazz, funk, hip hop, and international music concerts and DJ'd, all while completing his master's degree in clinical psychology. But he'd not forgotten his lifelong dream to open his own record shop. And in March 2018, Traffic Records was born in downtown Atascadero. In less than 3 years, Traffic Records has become the flagship record store of North County. Congratulations, Manuel.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And thank you to all of you for being here for an enlightening discussion about vinyl and the new documentary, Vinyl Nation. And oh, one more person, sorry, Grace. Sorry, Grace Tucker, our coordinator for this Zoom call, and also our festival and industry relations coordinator, fabulous staff member of the Slow Film Fest. Thank you, Grace. All right, Jim, you're on.
Okay, here's something that I'm just going to present to you, and then I'll ask some specific questions. But those of you who may have lived here back in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, the town of Santa Maria, call it the city of Santa Maria, 30 miles south, used to be one of the places for the Columbia Records plant. You could see it from the freeway. If you own a Simon & Garfunkel album or maybe a Bob Dylan album from that period, it could have been pressed at the Santa Maria Columbia Records plant. It no longer exists, but it was there, I believe, up until, or from about the mid-60s to 1981. And in fact, they used to have what's called the Columbia Records sale the first Saturday of the month. You go down there and there were a ton of records available for $1 each. I'm not sure if they were cutouts or returns or what they were, but I would return with a big stack of records the first Saturday of every month. So a little bit of local history, the fact that Columbia Records plant was here, you know, from mid-60s to early 80s. I guess the first question would be to Manuel and Malik, and the fact that, of course, the late 80s, CDs come in and all of a sudden records are a thing of the past. And then there was this dead zone until, well, and you can tell the audience, records started coming back. And Manuel, you have a record store. Malik, you've worked at Boo Boo Records. What happened in between that period from CDs to the resurgence of interest in vinyl?
Well, I mean, I noticed like young kids, like more and more people just started buying records. Like, you know, the small indie labels never really stopped pressing records. There was still a lot of DJs that were looking for 12 inches. House music and techno was huge, and a lot of 12 inches, you know, were coming out that way. So there was always, you know, it was always prevalent. And then we slowly started seeing more people started looking for used records. And I think that interest is really what started re-escalating, like the interest in vinyl. And it was really cheap.
Yeah, they were certainly a lot cheaper than they are now. You know, you often hear about this resurgence in vinyl, but there's a lot of us, Malik, myself, you, Jim, probably most people on this panel, that vinyl records never really went away. We were listening to records the whole time. You know, Apple, you touch on this in your documentary, but you know, Apple certainly made it convenient to listen to record from your pocket, or music rather, from your pocket. You know, you had your entire library. You could fit 10,000 songs in this little box. And that convenience came at a cost, you know, and it certainly had a devastating impact on the production of vinyl, but there was still a lot of us out there that were still pining for records. Small labels were producing, you know, small kind of promotional runs of vinyl records. And in the early 2000s, when actually Malik hired me at Boo Boo Records, he brought me in, and there were many of us who were very excited when we saw these imports coming in, and you know, we got to tell customers about it and share, you know, that records were still very much in production, just not in the quantity rather that they were before, maybe even quality. There was certainly a dip in that as well. So it's been neat to see this kind of resurgence that everybody talks about, but let's not forget the masses that are out there that were records really never went away.
I guess my next question to Christopher and Kevin would be the fascination with vinyl being, seeing or hearing music produced by this, in this vinyl record. If all the time you've just had a CD or listening to something on your iPhone or your computer, you don't really have a concept of how this is being done. And so when you see a record and here's this music coming out of this piece of plastic, so to speak, to me, it reminds me of people who have only seen films on DVDs or on a VHS, and all of a sudden they'll see the original way films were presented. Here's a piece of celluloid running through a machine, and you go, how on earth can this be happening? And I'm almost applying that to vinyl and the fact, how can this be happening? And I almost felt that from your film, and the fact that the actual process, along with the beautiful album cover, the actual interaction that you put the needle on the record itself is interactive, but still, I'm wondering if the resurgence of vinyl was like, how in the heck is this happening? So I just wonder, I know there was feedback in the film itself, but if you could, elaborate on that, just the resurgence having to do with the medium itself.
I'm gonna let you take this.
All right, cool. This is Kevin. I'm sorry, I'm used to saying that because we usually do these things on radio, and so we have to identify ourselves. But we found in doing our research that first of all, we should say that by the time we started making Vinyl Nation, vinyl had been coming back for 10 years. So we couldn't make a 90-minute film about why it was coming back because that debate had happened already. And there wasn't anything new for us to say. I will say in the course of us researching the movie, we found not only from our research just digging around in books and on the internet, but also in talking to the people who ultimately ended up being in Vinyl Nation, that they said a lot of things we hadn't thought of before. They said that vinyl records operate and ignite 4 of the 5 human senses. You can touch them, smell them, hear them, and not taste them. That's the one you can't do, but the other one, and see them. So thank you. And which is something we hadn't considered before. Also, the year that vinyl comes back, 2007, 2 things happen in the larger culture. One, it's the launch of the iPhone. And so we feel like in some way musically, we're at kind of the end of history because now you can carry everything you possibly need when you walk around, when you leave the house, including your entire music collection in your pocket. And I think that made very stark what was lost in terms of that exchange. Music becomes like a utility, not that much different than how you make a phone call. You just press a couple of buttons and there it is. And that's people who love music and dream about music all the time and can't imagine a day of their life without it. That relationship we found is often not satisfying or fulfilling enough. And finally, the other thing that happens in 2007, which I don't want to make too much of, but is the television show Mad Men. And the increasing fascination with all things mid-century. And what is more mid-century than other than perhaps an Eames table than a turntable?
I would just chime in on that too. I have a daughter who's 17 and she got a turntable maybe when she was 13. And I think for her, it was this tangibility that she had never had with music that drew her to records in the first place. I mean, she never owned CDs, and what's a cassette to her? So she's grown up with iTunes and with Spotify, but then she herself was longing for something that she actually had never had. That's just kind of strange. That's the idea of nostalgia when you've never experienced something, but it's true. Like it's with her generation. And so when she listens to an artist a bunch on Spotify and realizes like, I love this artist, I love this album, she makes a point to buy it on vinyl. She also loves to collect used vinyl, specifically from antique stores when she's going antiquing. She's always looking for records in the dollar bins there. And she's more adventurous than I am, just picking things out based on how they look. And again, that's not, Spotify is going to serve things up based on what you listen to. And this is just purely like attracting her, this big, beautiful album cover. I'm sure it's $1, $2 or $3. I'll take it. And hopefully it's something she discovers that she likes. And if not, she's like, I only spent $3 on. So journey of discovery is something that I think is also missing, that we were losing when everything went digital. And I think why people have come back to records, because that's the idea of digging through the racks and you just don't know what you're going to find that day, is something really special.
Yeah, a real sense of discovery, which I'm sure we will find at the record stores, Manuel's and Malik and Boo Boo's. Another question for the filmmakers. Of course, I like to open it up. If anybody else has any other questions, of course, chime in. But, you know, the film really focuses on albums, the wonderful liner notes, you know, album cover design, and of course, that wonderful record inside. For me, you know, from the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was 45s. And in some way, you know, I almost felt they had an equal status. I mean, a top selling single, also the fact that it's a 45 RPM. Apparently the sound is maybe a little bit better, so they say. But that was something I thought was fascinating, at least during that time. I mean, if you look at the Beatles, for instance, the White Album sessions, the biggest selling apparently in Revolution during White Album sessions, but not included on the White Album. Same thing with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. The single came out, it was recorded during the Sgt. Pepper sessions, but it's not on the album. So singles were actually almost a separate commodity. And I don't know if they were equal. I'm not sure about this, the facts about what would sell more, a single or an album, but I guess it's Malik, you would probably know this, Daptone Records. I think they still release singles, or there are some record labels that do singles. And I'm just wondering if singles will appear again, you know, instead of going onto a computer and downloading one song, well, you can have 2 songs with a single. And I'm just wondering if singles might make a resurgence, or maybe they already are and I'm not aware of it.
There's definitely a subculture of people who really love 45s. I would say a lot of DJs, especially, there's a lot of 45 DJs specifically. And then there's been quite a bit of like soul and edits that have like really focused on putting out 45s of tracks. And so outside of like Daptone, there's Coal Mine, this new Pembroke, you know, they put out some colored 45s and they all vanished instantaneously. So there's definitely people who are just really into that. And there's also like metal and punk also still do 45s. The culture is not as big, but there's definitely, it's there, and there's new stuff coming out all the time. So maybe it'll rise up, and every record store day, there's some really awesome 7-inches that get released.
Well, people who love 45s, because in your documentary, you talk about the inconvenience. You touch on the inconvenience of vinyl records, moving them, flipping them, finding them, buying them, which is not easy these days. 45s are even more hassle. And so you have to really be passionate about 45s and committing to the process. It lends itself more to the DJ culture, it seems. There's not a lot of people at home that are, you know, every 2.5 minutes getting off their chair and flipping a 45. So that, you know, I agree with Jim. There could have been a little bit more discussion on the kind of the relevance of 45s. And there's a lot of really exciting things, like Malik brought up a couple really great independent labels that are doing big things with, you know, small pieces of wax. A Coal Mine, you know, Penrose, F-Spot in LA, Wick, you know, and even labels now are even having their own subsidiary labels underneath them that are kind of marketing to different audiences. So it's exciting, I think, to see what it's inspiring rather, I think, to see what some of these small labels are able to do with the 45 culture.
The next question I would put out there is if any of you seen the film Ghost World, this Steve Buscemi character is this collector of collectors, and he's really into like 78s or original pressings of you know, blues recordings or things like that. And in your research, did you find some of those really, you know, dedicated music collectors where they want to, you know, get 78s or the original pressings of, say, you know, a Robert Johnson recording, something like that? Did you encounter any of the real deep collectors?
Sure. We didn't seek them out per se, but we have found that anybody who has spent time with records for more than a year or so will develop their own eccentricity around them. And some of them are a gentle step from where they began, and some of them are a 270-degree turn from where they began. I like schlocky 80s movie soundtracks, which thankfully there are a lot of, because most people think that stuff is garbage, and one man's garbage is another man's treasure. But we have found, I would say, everybody we talk to who, were it not for the very real limitations of square footage, i.e. they live in a studio apartment or a college dorm room or something like that, or they have a philosophy where, like, for example, my best friend is a new vinyl person, and his feeling is like his records are like the Hall of Fame. So he has 20 records. They're his favorite albums. They go in one crate under the nightstand by his bed like a prayer book, and that's it. And I think that is a kind of eccentricity, but it's not one that involves selectivity rather than depth. But no, pretty much everybody we talk to has their own weird thing that they're into, and we think that's like one of the most fun parts about records. And yes, we could take you through our film one person at a time. And if Chris was there to jog my memory, he could say, "Oh yeah, that woman was into like industrial records from the 1940s, and that guy was into like, you know, only live cuts from his hometown of Little Rock, Arkansas. Like those are the kinds of, everybody's got one of those. It's almost like your fingerprint. It's the thing that makes you unique as a vinyl person."
And not everyone we talked to in our research, we were able to get on camera for the film itself. I mean, back to your original question around 78s, I know there's somebody that we talked to who has a pretty sizable record collection himself, but he has a bunch of 78s from his father that he inherited, and that are still really special to him. And there's no way he can find that music anywhere else. It exists on those 78s in his particular collection, and he needs to take care of it. And there were definitely people that we talked to in our research, and just time and schedule wise, it just didn't work out, that have absolutely massive collections. And they would be people that you might not actually think of in the traditional sense of who would be collecting records. But they were fascinating to us. And it just didn't work out that we could get them on film. Plus, we got to squeeze it down into a 90-minute movie. So it's like what is ultimately going to get us through the narrative arc? And like, I'm glad we're having this conversation. And Jim, you're great, bring up these great questions, because there's just so much more you could dig into that we just didn't have time to explore in our documentary.
Yeah, we feel like if we had covered everything in 90 minutes, then the topic probably wasn't big enough to justify the movie in the first place.
How much footage did you have to cut down to the 90 minutes?
Well, we did, I think, 45 dedicated interviews, and that doesn't count the on-the-fly interviews we did when we shot Record Store Day at Mills Record Company in Kansas City, or at Austin Record Convention, where we did plenty more than that. And every interview was at least an hour. So we had hours upon hours upon hours of footage. Thankfully, we had a great post-production team that went through all of it for us. And then Kevin went through all the transcripts while they were watching all the footage. So it was a bunch. I think data-wise, for any data nuts out there, I think it was something like 25 terabytes of data, because we shot in 4K. So it was just insane. But yeah, we had to pare that all down. So I think the first rough cut we watched, the first assembly, I should say, not even really rough cut, was 5.5 hours. You know, and then we got it down to 4, 3, 2.5, and then the real hard work to get it down to 90 minutes happened.
Well, great job. I guess another question I can put to Malik and Kristy, and the fact of the correlation between radio and vinyl. And it's kind of funny because, you know, I've got Sirius in my car, and one of the stations is called Classic Vinyl. And I'm telling you, it's not vinyl. You know, I mean, if they are, I'm missing something.
It's not vinyl.
No. But it's a nice title. But I do remember, Malik, when you did a show at KCBX, I think you either played vinyl solely, or, you know, as much as you could. And Kristy, maybe when you were at KCPR, you remember playing vinyl. When I was at KCPR back in the 70s, obviously that's all there was. But I just wonder if there's a correlation between radio and vinyl at all at this time.
Yeah, I would say that there is. I mean, for me, like I said, my first record was the Beatles' Help. It was the soundtrack, and I playing my mom's album. So I was already into vinyl, but getting it to the record, getting to KCPR and going through the stacks, it was the discovery aspect of it. And when I was there, it was all still primarily vinyl. The CDs had started to be introduced, and it was almost like, do I have to actually push a button? So, I mean, I found that I dove really deep into a lot of areas that I probably wouldn't have. And I discovered a lot that I wouldn't have because I was able to flip through the stacks at KCPR. And to the previous question of, people find their eccentricities. I did a Beatles special program called Octopus's Garden when I was there. And I still, if I find a record that has an odd Beatles cover on it, I have a section of my record collection that is Beatles covers. There was a band, Screaming Broccoli, that did a great 13 different versions of Eleanor Rigby, including a punk and a polka version. And those are things I'm pretty sure don't exist anywhere else except for on that indie press record that I found while I was flipping through at KCPR.
Malik, you were pretty much vinyl all the time on KCBX, weren't you? Uh-oh.
I'm back. Here I am, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
most of it was just kind of out of cheapness. Like records were really cheap back then. And so at the time you had limited amount of money, and you could either spend your money on like one CD for $16.99, or you can get like 3 records for about that much. So with doing a radio show, it allowed you to kind of like look for different interests. Like I got to do a funk show. I got to do indie rock on KCPR. So college radio really influenced it. So I started collecting all these records because I could go look for old soul records and just find a lot of stuff that wasn't even reissued on vinyl at that time or on CD at that time. So that's really what kind of pushed me collecting records, was wanting to play this music and like self-discovery of it, like looking for these things that I read about or I hear about, or just like looking for new things to play. So yeah, so when I did the show on KCBX, I just brought all that stuff with me.
Wow. And do you think record stores like what's depicted in the film, do you go into a store and there's that sense of discovery? Do you see more record stores proliferating? In other words, this is a resurgence, and do you think it's really going to grow?
We can speak from our point of view, which is not as up close and personal as the guys who run and work in record stores every day. But our point of view in releasing our movie digitally in partnership with 300 record stores around the country is that we were surprised and delighted at how many record stores are in places we do not think of as white-hot musical centers of America, or places with legendary college radio stations like San Luis Obispo. But when you find out that there are 4 competing record stores who all know each other in places like Sioux City, South Dakota, you say to yourself, wow, this is really special. A, I got to get to Sioux City to do some digging. And B, the musical map when it comes to record stores in the United States is what they call in political science a 50-state solution, rather than a coastal or primarily urban or college town solution. And that's amazing. Like all I want to do now is go to places like Boise, Idaho, where the Record Exchange is, who is one of our greatest partners and is right in the middle of downtown, and land and spend 48 hours shopping at Boise and turn around, and maybe that's all I'll see of the state capital of Idaho, but that's just fine with me. Like that's I feel like I want the record store guys to speak to this, but I feel like as a nation, we are in a really good place when it comes to the climate of record stores.
Well, I assume both of you might have been to Amoeba Music. There's one in San Francisco, the one in Los Angeles, I guess.
Once or twice, yeah.
And that's sort of like going to a Best Buy or a Costco of records and music and movies as well.
I went on opening day in San Francisco.
Wow. Another one is Rasputin. It's also almost similar to how big they are. I think they have one up in Berkeley, but it is encouraging in the fact that, vinyl is happening, and it's well profitable, and of course there's all the interest in it. Instead of me also asking the questions, the fact that we have the filmmakers here, I just want to put it out to the rest of you. If you have any questions that I'm missing, or any questions for the filmmakers.
Can I make a comment that will then eventually hopefully lead to a question?
Please.
So what I really like, there's lots of vinyl documentaries out there, lots of music documentaries. There's a handful of vinyl documentaries. One thing that I think you guys really did well is you highlighted some of the unsung heroes in the production process. So gave us a little bit more, you know, everybody's seen the videos on YouTube of pucks being made and records being stamped and, you know, mothers and masters. And it's very like, it's titillating. It's exciting. It's, you know, because I still believe that this, sorry, my store phone is apparently blowing up today. It's an exciting process to watch, and it helps us kind of understand a little better as a consumer and as record lovers, like how the magic happens. One thing that you guys did that I was very interested in was the a little bit of a focus on the folks that are printing jackets, and the packaging and the artwork, and it was fascinating. I haven't really seen a documentary yet that quite tackles that theme. Could you guys see yourself doing an expansion on something like this, or a follow-up that kind of reveals more of the production process from finalization of recording all the way from, you know, through mastering to when it gets to the record store? That process is completely fascinating, and I don't think anybody yet has really tackled it.
I don't, yeah, we haven't talked about doing anything with an expansion. To your point about the packaging and the printing, we will admit that is a total accident that it's in our movie. The reason we were at Stoughton Printing in the first place is because we were scheduled to interview Jessa Zapa Gray, who is a consultant to the industry, but she lives down in Orange County and we were in Los Angeles. She's like, that's a drag for you to guys come all the way down to where I am. Why don't I find a place where you can interview me with one of my clients? That's,
oh, wow.
Where should we go? And she said, well, what about Stoughton Printing and City of Industry? We said, that sounds great. So we roll in there ready to interview Jessa with an interesting background, and immediately looked around and we're like, can we shoot this? And so we're talking to Rob Michon and said, Rob, could we shoot these? Like, yeah, well, we're going to be shutting down production for the day though in about 30 minutes. We're like, Jessa, can we hold? and we just went on a tour. And I agree that was like, it just blew my mind. Both, like, they have the big commercial, you know, automated printing, but then they have the other room with the old tip-on style jackets, and actually watching that process and literally seeing the woman kind of kick a pedal underneath the electric conveyor belt and then tip on the jacket and then kick it again. And she literally does it you can count. It's less than 2 seconds, and she is manually putting that on. Just watching that all come together was fascinating. So then it helped us in pre-production to go, okay, this is really cool visually what we captured. Let's just go all in on this and find a bunch of archival footage about all the crazy stuff you can do in making vinyl records, as well as the packaging that goes along with it. Because that is what makes a lot of these things really special to both collectors and to new people alike. They say, oh my God, I never knew that this is what records really could be all about. So, yeah, fascinating there. I'm a process geek too. There is more that you could explore there. I don't know. It wouldn't be anything I would think like in terms of feature length. There's a vignette beyond, I would guess, what we have done that, yeah, you could really go pretty far down that rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, totally. Absolutely. Well, thank you for highlighting that, because I found that to be the fascinating part about the documentary.
I will say one of my favorite documentaries of all time is called Note by Note, The Making of a Steinway Piano. Which is about 85 minutes long, and it essentially it is the life cycle of a Steinway piano, and it begins with a tree in the woods of Ontario, and it ends with a Steinway being moved into someone's living room in Queens. And
I'd like to watch that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic documentary. I don't know if it's Chris and I to do it, but a similar documentary that begins with a band rehearsing somewhere and ends with a record rolling off the line and them getting their first set of pressings is probably
buying that record at a record store. I mean, what a span of events that has to happen for that record to be created, you know, before it reaches a consumer. So thank you for speaking to that.
Yeah, someone needs to make that movie. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we just inspired a new documentary.
Yeah,
by other filmmakers.
No, I know we all have a love of music, but being a disc jockey and playing vinyl, of course, how do you start a record when you want to play it on the air? You cue it up. And therefore, I think there would be no other way that scratching would have become a part of music, you know. And again, it's almost an art form, I think, as far as finding certain vinyl and getting that sound with the scratching, which I don't think could be done any other way other than with a vinyl record.
Absolutely. We were very fortunate. We're not DJs ourselves, but we were very fortunate to have the legendary Cutmaster Kurt in our movie, who is a product of the Central Valley from Santa Cruz, and there was a lot of Kurt's interview we couldn't include when he talked about some of his favorite scratching techniques, and things like attaching the cartridge head of the tone arm upside down and putting a record on a pencil so you could control the direction that it spun, but the needle was playing this way so you could play the underside. I mean, Kurt, the point Kurt was making in the line that does end up in our movie is that records are an invitation to a kind of manual and dexterous, if that's a word, creativity. And I like to, I love what one of my favorite music critics says, where he said, if you think sampling and scratching is not composing, I'll give you the 150 records that went on to De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising, and we'll see if you end up with De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising.
That's great. Again, I'll open it up to the rest. If there are any other questions for the filmmakers or anything I'm missing here, or please feel free.
I have a question for Kristy, just because I'm fascinated. I like to build things myself, and I'm learning as I go. And I'm just wondering how you got inspired and how you actually did restore a turntable. My daughter just bought one recently, and it doesn't work. And so we're both eyeing it going, I wonder if this is something we could actually fix ourselves. So what was your process for doing that?
Yeah, well, and full admission, the husband did bulk of the work on that, since I was busy with the day job. But it was, we have a Harman Kardon T60. And so it was a combination of belts, changing capacitors, changing the cartridge out, actually refurbishing the Grado cartridge that we had on it. There's also a great sort of 20-minute little documentary and tour of the Grado factory on YouTube, if anybody hasn't seen it, wants to geek out on how cartridges are made. So it really was taking the entire thing apart and finding every single bit of componentry outside of, let's say, the shell and the actual platter itself, and what could be replaced. And so really bringing that whole thing back to life. And then the other major construction piece was the plinth, or the platter, that the platform that was built, which is steel, Teflon, some other carbon fibers, some spring coils, all, like I said, equaling 128 pounds, that is now bolted to the wall. So I can slam dance in my house now, and the record is not going to skip. So, and it really was inspired by these guys. I mean, I think the film, what really touched me too was the community and the love of music, which maybe it was partly being on lockdown with the quarantine, but I really wanted to play the Spinners album that I got from a book reading of Wesley Stace, who's also known as John Wesley Harding. He had picked it up at a used record store and said, okay, at the end, if anybody wants this, and I'm immediately. And so there was something about that movie. It was like, I have to play this album again. And, the current setup wasn't working. And that led to a 6-week mass project of the platform and the refurbish of the table and testing out, making sure the spinners worked. And the inaugural spin, when it was all said and done, was John Doe and the Golden State. And just, yeah, it's pretty much all of my best friends are through records and through the radio station and through music. So.
Right, well done.
One thing I just want to, I don't know if I want to close with this, but I don't know, and maybe I'm off in space here, actually, literally, but if you know about the Voyager spacecraft and the golden record on it, it has classical music, it has Chuck Berry on it, and it's not going to reach the nearest star for another 40,000 years, but it has a record and it has a turntable, instructions how to do it. I think it has saying hello in 100 languages or something like that. But the record is pretty much universal. When I say universal, I'm talking about the universe. It's this way of producing music that I think will last forever. And we'll be long extinct, and maybe some other species will be listening to that record, who knows when. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating. It was launched, I think, 43 years ago, and I don't think they had other means of producing music or showing the art of music to an alien planet or something, but still it's out there, it's outside of our solar system, and it's heading somewhere with the golden record. So if you've seen any documentaries on Voyager, it's fascinating to learn about the infamous record. So I think Carl Sagan told Chuck Berry that, his music is going to be, out there forever. So
I think there's also directions back to Earth on that record. So they're going to, whoever finds it in 40,000 years is going to come back looking for a Chuck Berry concert.
Yeah.
They're likely not going to find, they're going to be disappointed.
I think it was 2017 when a bunch of space geeks here in San Francisco decided to re-release the Voyager Golden Record on vinyl in a sort of commemorative box set, and they did a Kickstarter for it. And my wife and I were early in line for that, and the box set now sits directly above our turntable.
Oh, nice.
The record, the discs are not in solid gold as they are on the Voyager itself, but they're in a gold vinyl, and I believe the packaging won a Grammy for its innovation and design.
Have you played it?
It's a very special part of our record collection. Yeah.
Way ahead of me.
The very last hello on the 150 hellos, which is in English, and I believe is by the voice of an 8 or 9 year old child, is Carl Sagan's son. He was the.
What a worthwhile project. It's too bad we don't do more projects like that. I thought it was pretty fascinating. But hey, there's a record on that spacecraft. So, well, I'd like to open it up to anybody for any closings, any other questions. This has really been a lively conversation.
Been great. I think some people probably have to go, so we probably should say goodbye. But I just want to thank thank you all so much, Kevin and Chris. I hope you do follow up on get that project going on the life of a record from start to finish. I love it. You heard it here first. Malik and Manuel, good luck with your shops, and congratulations on the success. And I want to thank Boo Boo Records too for being a great supporter of our festival all the time, but also of this particular event that we're doing. So, and for helping to launch you guys. And thank you, Kristy, for lending your story to this, and for being a big supporter of the movie Final Nation. And thank you, Grace, for making this happen, and for providing stickers for our Watch at Home kits, which are really cool. And I also want to thank Sange Lige Wines. I'm not sure I'm saying that properly. Sange Lige, I should say it properly because I'm Canadian, for their wines that they've donated to our Watch at Home kits, as well as Wild Fields for the beer. And I just want to, and thank you too for Satellite of Love and Traffic Records for helping spread the word about this event. Finally, thank you, Jim, for lending your expertise and your great hosting abilities. And we all look forward to being back in the Palm Theater when we can be. So
hopefully soon.
Until then, thank you again, everybody. And I'll look forward to seeing you all again somewhere.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
for inviting me.
Thank you.
Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet everyone too.
Great to meet everyone.
Yep.